Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our 5-webinar series celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have a very interesting program for you this afternoon, and I would like to introduce our moderator for this session.
Hi, everyone.
Moderator for this session, Tina Hooper. Sorry about that, Tina.
That's okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Hooper, and I'm the Civil Rights Specialist for the Massachusetts Division as well as the Vermont Division. And it's my honor to welcome you to our Americans with Disabilities Act webinar. We are continuing our commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And as you just heard, this is our second session of the 5-part series. The first session last month was entitled Agency-Wide Engagement. And today's session will focus on updating the inventory of the ADA transition plans. So we've designed an informative session filled with expertise, which includes an opening remark from the Associate Administrator for Infrastructure, Mr. Harry Kala. In addition, you will hear from 2 representatives of state transportation agencies. The first will be Sant Michener of New Hampshire DOT, and you'll also hear from Mr. Brad Bradley of Florida DOT, respectively. So as you can tell, there's an abundance of information for the entire audience. Before we get started, I want to publicly thank everyone that contributed to the success of this webinar. We worked hard on this. Our gratitude is extended to FHWA officials, particularly Ms. Irene Rico, who's the Associate Administrator for Civil Rights, each of today's speakers, the AASHTO community, particularly the Civil Rights community, for their valuable input as we gathered information on topics, and as well as you, the audience. So without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Harry Kala. Mr. Harry Kala is the Associate Administrator for Infrastructure. In July 2019, Harry Kala was selected for the SES position of Associate Administrator for Infrastructure with Federal Highway Administration. As the Associate Administrator for Infrastructure, Harry serves as a member of FHWA's leadership team and participates in developing strategic initiatives that have broad national impact upon the agency and the nation's transportation system. Prior to this position, Harry served as the Associate Administrator for Research, Development, and Technology, where he provided executive oversight to FHWA's National Highway Research and Technology Program. Prior to his most recent appointment, Harry served as the SES position of Director, Office of Pre-Construction, Construction, and Pavements within the Office of Infrastructure. In this role, Harry provided national leadership in pavement, technology, and construction engineering to FHWA headquarters, field offices, state and local governments, industry, and academia. Harry joined FHWA in 2001 as a transportation specialist within the Office of Safety and has held a variety of progressively responsible roles, including team leader in the Office of Safety, team leader in the Office of Operations, and director for the Center for Accelerating Innovation. Harry holds a master's degree in civil engineering from the State University of New York and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of DePaul. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Harry Kala.
Thank you, Tina. Before I start, Brad, do you want to tell folks about the questions and captioning? Thank you, Hari. Yes, folks, if you have questions at any time during the webinar, please use the Q&A pod on the left-hand side of your screen. You can submit a question by typing in the caption box at the bottom of that screen. We will monitor the questions. If you're having technical issues, we will respond right away through the Q&A pod. If you have a question about the content of the webinar, please submit that, and we will be holding questions until after all three of our speakers have addressed or delivered their address. I would say if you experience audio issues at any time, please download the Adobe Connect app and try reconnecting through the webinar using the app. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Tina, for the introduction. Good afternoon. I'm so honored to speak to you today on this important topic. As mentioned, last month we celebrated 30th anniversary of ADA. That's an awesome accomplishment. As you know, this landmark law prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability and requires that public entities make their pedestrian facilities accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. Through improved design and construction standards and ADA plans, our state and local partners have made great strides in accessibility over the years, but there's certainly more work to do. Imagine needing to plan every step you take, and that's what individuals with disabilities must do to avoid a misplaced utility pole that is in sidewalk, or a pathway that is uneven or overgrown, or even missing curb cut that keeps them from reaching the crosswalk. Having to navigate these obstacles is not just a matter of inconvenience, it is a barrier to access. As I said, we are improving, but we still have a lot of work to do. We need to make sure our sidewalks, street crossings, pedestrian signals, and transit stops are accessible to people with disabilities. It's just so important. Remember, the 4 goals of ADA are equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. These goals cannot be achieved if pedestrians with disabilities cannot travel safely and independently to jobs, schools, and other destinations. We need to continue our efforts to inventory existing roadways, sidewalks, and transit stops, identify the barriers that exist, and fix them. We must ensure access to our transportation system for all users, including those with disabilities, not just because we are required by law, but because it is the right thing to do. Thank you to our state and local transportation partners. You know how important it is to maintain an up-to-date inventory and ADA transition plan so that barriers to accessibility can be removed. You are doing great things, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you to all participants in this webinar today for recognizing the importance of this issue and for taking actions to learn more and share your experiences. Remember, each of us plays an important role making our transportation system accessible to persons with disabilities. This is the second in the series of 5 webinars put together by Federal Highway Administration to highlight best practices and emerging technologies used by state DOTs. In today's webinar entitled Updating Inventory, we will learn innovative ways to assess and record the condition of pedestrian facilities. We will also explore how technologies can aid inventory assessments. Today we'll hear from 2 state DOTs on their approach to completing and updating their ADA inventory. Thanks again to those who are working hard to remove barriers and provide access to the persons with disabilities. I hope that you find this webinar valuable and insightful, and that you will gain new ideas and perspectives on how to develop and maintain your ADA inventory. Thank you again for this great opportunity, and now I turn it back to Tina to introduce our presenters.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kala. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first presenter, Mr. Sant Mishner. Sant has over 20 years of experience working in ADA compliance, from signage and accessways to accessible science exhibits. He started his career in accessibility as a pilot, working with Freedom's Wings, a program designed to help para and quadriplegics fly gliders. He served for 16 years at the McAuliffe Shepard Discovery Center, designing and developing accessible science exhibits and planetarium shows, and then as assistant director and project manager, overseeing exhibit curation, facilities management, and building construction. He is currently the state's ADA Title II coordinator for New Hampshire DOT Office of Federal Compliance, specializing in Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. He surveys pedestrian infrastructure such as curb ramps, sidewalks, and pedestrian signals, as well as New Hampshire DOT-owned buildings for accessibility, and drafted the New Hampshire DOT ADA Transition Plan. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Sant Mishner.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some of you on the West Coast. Sant Mishner here, broadcasting live from the great state of New Hampshire, where it is a sunny, breezy, cool 63 degrees. I hope you're all enjoying the last of the summer weather. We're a pretty small state, New Hampshire. We have about 1.3 million people. We have 6 maintenance districts. And each one of our maintenance districts does have a trained ADA coordinator. I'm the state coordinator of the 6 sub-coordinators. Little background with our timeline for our ADA transition planning and self-evaluation. We originally completed a transition plan in 1992. That was well before my time. But in response to the 2013 Department of Justice Federal Highway Joint Technical Assistance on the ADA requirements to provide curb ramps when roads are altered through resurfacing, we really got into high gear with meeting our ADA obligations. And in 2014, there was an effort with University of New Hampshire Technology Transferred, or T-Squared, to develop a inventory tool for pedestrian infrastructure. And in May of 2015, NHDOT hires their first ADA Title II coordinator, yours truly. And I think it was like my second day. I was off and running, starting to inventory our infrastructure with SAIDS. September 2016, we submitted our transition plan to Federal Highway, and in October 2019, after a few back and forths and improvements here and there, our transition plan was accepted by Federal Highway, and that was a day to celebrate. Talking to ADA professionals here, I'm preaching to the choir. We all know that the self-evaluation is required by ADA law, but it also meets a requirement for our New Hampshire DOT Stewardship and Oversight Agreement with Federal Highway. And it sets a good example for New Hampshire cities and towns to meet their obligations too, because we couldn't compel others to fulfill their obligations if we're not doing it. Inventory data that is collected is utilized by many stakeholders within NHDOT, as well as outside of NHDOT with regional planning commissions or municipal planning organizations. Our pedestrian infrastructure data is updated as new facilities are built, largely through resurfacing. I go out and inventory, and it also kind of serves as an inspection to make sure that those new facilities that are built are ADA compliant, and that while the contractor is mobilized, if they have to fix anything, they can do it right then and there. It also, of course, fulfills the living document requirement of the transition plan, because we re-inventory districts, one district annually per an outlined schedule that is in the transition plan. So our data isn't just collected to sit on a shelf. It's always being utilized and always being refreshed. And we do inventory one of the districts every 5 years. We do a single district per year, which I'm still in the process of doing this year during our construction season. Our self-evaluation for assets such as sidewalks, curb ramps, crosswalks, pedestrian signals, rest areas, transportation centers, park and rides, and our NHDOT offices. Those are the assets that we're inserting into our inventory database, and those assets are also only within the New Hampshire right-of-way, New Hampshire DOT right-of-way. Other towns and cities are responsible and largely are working on their own assets. So for rest areas and our transportation centers, park and rides, and NHDOT office buildings, I use the ADA checklist for existing facilities, which was created by the Institute for Human-Centered Design and the New England ADA Center. And you can find that at adachecklist.org. I adapted it for iPad use. That's what we use our other inventory software on. Makes it very quick and easy. You can just check off our boxes, yes or no, add notes as we go through the checklist. Checklist is also very useful. It has a lot of the little illustrations, so it makes it very clear what you're measuring, what you're looking for, and it also helps when you compile the data for the deficiency data for to rectify any issues that come up. And what we do is we transfer the data to a spreadsheet and then a narrative punch list. So a lot of our facilities, such as these, are actually contracted out and managed by a different either state agency or private entity. So to have a narrative checklist or a punch list, sorry, that speaks in layman's terms, you got to do this, and this is how you got to do it, makes the changes happen very easily, and everything's right there in front of you. So for pedestrian infrastructure data collection, we utilize the SADES, which is the statewide asset data exchange system that I mentioned before. And the infrastructure that we inventory are the curb ramps, sidewalks, and pedestrian signals and crosswalks. The SADES was initially developed by UNH Technology Transfer Center, or T-Squared, and they make it available to New Hampshire cities and towns through RPCs and MPOs. They do a nice half-day training session where they review what the assets are, like, you know, what is the curb ramp, this is the features of it that you're measuring, the attributes that you're inputting data for, and then all that data that everyone is collecting is compiled into an accessible statewide GIS composite map. So we all have access to the same data, and various stakeholders statewide can collect and access the data instantaneously. It also reduces double collecting data. If a town is, or an RPC is collecting data, we both don't have to collect the same data. I actually had an instance where I ran into another collector, and they were like, "Oh, what are you collecting?" And I was like, "Oh, what are you collecting?" And we, worked out who was collecting what, so we weren't double collecting the data. And it works kind of both ways because I was kind of helping them by collecting data in our right-of-way, and they were also collecting in their town's data as well, but it was also our right-of-way. So, you know, we kind of help each other out with that. And one of the beauties is, you know, we're all using the same app. We're all using the same, you know, data collection techniques, and it's all completely scalable. So the smallest town up to, you know, the big DOT, we all use the same, you know, the same Esri collector app, which is quite convenient because it runs on an iPad. That's what we use. I believe now it does work on other tablets as well, using Android. And the data is stored in the Esri geospatial cloud, so it's safely stored. Like I said, it's accessible to stakeholders anywhere using the same accurate data. And our asset attributes are self-defined, so we can change what we're collecting and how we're collecting it as our collection efforts mature. So, and also after we analyze the data, we're like, oh, you know, we really should be collecting this data to make it more accurate and useful. And like I said before, multiple bureaus within NHDOT also utilize the data for tracking and planning purposes. So we're using a relatively inexpensive, established, and customizable off-the-shelf app such as Esri Collector. It puts the data collection process within reach of even small towns and organizations to fill their ADA obligations of self-evaluation and transition planning. So it's, like I said, it's not just the big state DOT using it, and even New Hampshire is not a big state DOT, but it is scalable to the, you know, any DOT can utilize this. So by utilizing the ArcGIS Collector app, we can tailor make whatever data is useful and how it's collected. So we can be more refined and targeted. I know in the very early days of SAGE, we were collecting some data that really wasn't as useful as we might have liked, such as, you know, what side of the sidewalk or what side of the road we were collecting on, or how many curb cuts, because you'd be out there collecting the data and you suddenly realize, was that 13 curb cuts or 14? And you kind of look back, and we found that that data wasn't really useful in the analysis and barrier removal, so we stopped collecting it and chose to collect some other data instead. And when there are app updates, when we make updates, and when the app updates, it does make it more accurate and viable. We were, in the beginning too, instead of collecting, well, the width of this curb ramp is 42 inches, instead we were doing a range of different, was it below 36 inches or 36 to 48? And if those numbers should change, which I know in some of the other efforts, some of those ranges do change, and suddenly your data wasn't viable anymore. So we were able to refine that and change it to an exact number, so we know, okay, well, this curb ramp is 54 inches wide, so we have exact numbers. Of course, Esri, the creator of the base app that we're using for the Collector app, they're updating the app and adding new features, and it's really changed over the years because it's a lot faster to use now. It's they streamline procedures to make the data collection faster and more intuitive, which is great to have that backing. And here's an example of some of the evolution and upgrades. This is a screenshot from one of the early versions of SAGE. And you can see that all of the roadways were all the same width line. You really don't have any features to correlate where the curb ramp is or where the crosswalk is, where the sidewalk is. So when you're collecting data, the point is dropped and it's not always the most accurate. And then we upgraded to, you can see on the right-hand side, an aerial view, which you can see the actual roadways that you're collecting on. You can see the slip lanes and the crosswalks and curb ramps to more accurately place your data point. So you have that background information to really see where your data is going. So let's talk a little bit about our different assets. We have sidewalks. We have 20 attributes for our sidewalks, such as like even curb type and curb reveal. Is there a buffer? What obstructions are? We have on the left-hand side there, we have drop-down menus that as you're collecting, you can pick from different things. Like for obstructions, for example, is there a fire hydrant, utility pole, street furniture, that sort of thing. So it can go really fast as you're putting the data in. We have vertical clearance, changes in profile, horizontal spacing, running slope and cross slope, and even if the sidewalk grade is greater than the road grade. So that's just a small sample of the different attributes we have. The collection does go pretty fast. We do have 280 miles of sidewalks, and the data is also utilized by RPCs and consultants for planning. Our curb ramps, same thing, 22 attributes, such as does the curb ramp have detectable warnings? Is the detectable warning full width? That sort of thing. Is it outside a path of cars? So we get a pretty clear picture through the different attributes exactly what we're looking at. And statewide, in our right-of-way, in NHDOT's right-of-way, we have 3,900 ramps. It's probably closer to 4,000 now. We are building more and more of them. And that inventory is also utilized by the Highway Design Bureau for planning. They will be looking at where we're resurfacing and what curb ramps will need to be upgraded and updated. Crosswalks is another thing we collect while we're there. 16 attributes, like what kind of paint type is it? Is it thermoplastic, flat, retroreflective? Is the crosswalk paint faded? Our traffic bureau utilizes that as a GIS-based inventory, so they can see, have eyes out there, as many eyes as possible looking at things that they're responsible for. And we also do pedestrian access buttons. We are measuring 25 attributes, such as distance from crosswalk lines, distance from curb shoulder, button approach widths and lengths, landing pad slope. And that data is utilized by our traffic bureau as well for planning and condition assessment, so they can see what work they might have to be doing in the future. And we also have a photos layer. So we have geotagged photos They're located, you can see them on the map, so you can see exactly where the picture was taken from. This particular one is it's indicating one of our pedestrian signals, which the next slide shows exactly why we took a picture of that. You can see that, and well, if this was on Mars, perhaps, because I hear Martians have like 8-foot long appendages, they might be able to hit that button. But here on Earth, that's not compliant at all because it's too far of a reach and it's got a curved barrier in between there. So that's why we have that particular picture. Then we take all this data and we QA, QC it, and we can prioritize it utilizing a ranking system that the ADA Transition Plan Work Group devised. Criteria include condition, width, slope, location, lighting, clearance, etc. And once we take that information, we assign values relating to usability and impact on accessibility to determine an attribute rating, which we can factor in to arrive at a normalized ranking percentage with low numbers indicating poor condition, high numbers indicating a good condition. We're also working on a GIS-based heat map that will be developed to graphically show areas in need of attention. There are also some other SAIDS initiatives in the works. We have stream crossings, road surface management, guardrails, tidal crossings, culverts and closed drainage systems, resurfacing as-built, all using the same technology, all using the same collector app. I use some of these as well, like the resurfacing as-built, to track where we have paved and where there's active paving going on, because I like to get in after the paving is complete to inventory any new curb ramps that are being built to make sure they're flush to the new pavement. Here are some of the inventory resources that I talked about. The NHDOT SAIDS Pedestrian Infrastructure Online Viewer is available through our website at the address on the screen. We do not have the photos layer on the public viewer, unfortunately. We don't want to incriminate anybody, so we leave that off. UNH Technology Transfer Center, who really developed the SAIDS program, they have a website at nhsaids.com. And also that ADA checklist for existing facilities that I mentioned earlier is at adachecklist.org. Now, that is all for me. I hope you could all hear me. We're speaking pretty loudly, and I'm not sure why it wasn't coming through, but hopefully if you have any questions, I can address them at the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think, Brad, there's going to be a brief announcement, and I'm going to turn it over to Brad Allen.
Yes, thanks, folks. I apologize. We're having a technical difficulty with the closed captioning. We're going to try and share the closed captioning through a slightly different means than we had anticipated. However, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at a later date with the full closed captioning. So we apologize for this currently. Please bear with us, but we're going to move forward with our next presentation.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And thank you so much, Plant Commissioner, for that presentation. I thought it was really interesting and lots of helpful techniques, and I'm sure we will receive a couple of questions. But we're going to move on to our next presenter, who was Brad Bradley. So Brad was born in Tallahassee, Florida. He attended Florida State University and co-op with Florida DOT Central Office until graduation in 1997. For the next 11 years, he worked as a bridge engineer for 3 international engineering firms. He then returned to Florida DOT, where he worked as an assistant area structures design engineer and a roadway design quality assurance engineer. He now serves as a project management support engineer and the state ADA coordinator. Brad has 6 children and 1 grandchild, with 5 of his children still at home, with he and his wife in Tallahassee. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Mr. Brad Bradley. Thank you, Brad.
Well, hi there, and greetings from the Sunshine State. I was speaking with the other speaker before the webinar started, and Stanton informed me that their highs today in New Hampshire were in the low 60s to 63, and we here in Florida are about 30 degrees warmer and a whole lot more humid. The high right now in Tallahassee is around 91, so it's quite a change from one state to ours. But I wanted to welcome you all and thank you for attending the presentation today. I'll be discussing how DOT leverages the use of technology in relation to the transition plan. Now, I'll be speaking specifically about Title II, which relates to non-discrimination on the basis of disability in state and local government services, specifically relating to existing facilities as found in 28 CFR 35, Section 150. Now, this section speaks generally about a public entity being required to have services, programs, and activities that are readily accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. The methods that can be used for meeting these compliance requirements can range from redesign or acquisition up to and including alteration of existing facilities, or really any other method to meet the compliance requirements. The time period for compliance has really already expired a number of years ago. Any structural changes to facilities that were required to be undertaken in order to comply with the ADA should have been conducted within 3 years of the effective date of the ADA, which was January 92. So by January of 1995, all structural changes should have been made. But most jurisdictions today are still operating under the provision of the last sentence on your screen that says, but in any event, as expeditiously as possible. Paragraph D of this section talks about the transition plan itself, that in the event that any structural changes to facilities will be required and the public entity employs 50 or more persons, then a transition plan is required to be developed, and the due date for that was 6 months after the effective date of the ADA law, which again was January of 1992. So by July of 92, the transition plan was supposed to be provided, and an opportunity was supposed to be given to interested persons to be involved in and to participate with the development of that transition plan. Now, paragraph 2 of this section speaks of a public entity that has authority over streets, roads, or walkways, which would definitely include the Florida Department of Transportation, has a responsibility to develop a schedule for providing curb ramps or other slope surfaces in order to make our pedestrian facilities accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities. And then that was to cover the priority facilities leading to state and local government offices and facilities, transportation, places of public accommodations, and employers, and then that would be followed by walkways serving other areas. Now, paragraph 3 summarized the 4 data points or elements that must be provided in the transition plan at a minimum. Point 1 is to identify the physical obstacles that limit that limit the accessibility to the programs or services offered by the entity. Element number 2 is to describe the methods that will be used to meet the compliance requirements. Item 3 is to specify a schedule, and if the period of transition is to take longer than 1 year, then the plan was to identify the steps that will be taken in each year of that transition period. And then finally, data point 4 is to provide the official responsible for implementation of the plan, and that official was to be designated no lower than the department head level of the agency. Okay, paragraph 4, it basically closes the loop of the actions that were necessary in order to meet accessibility requirements, and that mentions that the transition plan required under the ADA does not apply to those policies and practices that were already included in the transition plan that was required under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And finally, this paragraph A of section 107 of the regulations for the ADA states that any entity that employs 50 or more people must designate at least one employee to coordinate the efforts to comply with the ADA. And this person's responsibilities will also include investigation of any complaints alleging noncompliance with the ADA. And the names of the individuals who are designated under this part must be provided to interested individuals. The name, the address, and telephone number of those individuals need to be provided so that they can be easily contacted by the public. So with that said, I'm going to move on to discuss specifically how the DOT, the FDOT, is leveraging technology as it relates to the transition plan. So just as collaboration platforms such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams have been catapulted into the limelight here with the pandemic and the actions that are being taken to flatten the curve, DOT is trying to leverage technology in order to make better use of the transportation dollar and also to fulfill the requirements of the transition plan. The first thing I want to talk about is called SAPFIM, which is an acronym which stands for Safe and Accessible Pedestrian Facility Inventory Model. This too, like my colleague from New Hampshire was discussing earlier, is a geospatial tool. This one is web-based for helping to create the inventory, which is the section of the regulations that I just briefly discussed. This is a no-cost or low-cost method to fulfill the ADA transition plan requirements. And the features of this software tool could be summarized with these 6 words: collect, map, assess, prioritize, program, and report. And as a lot of people who work in governmental agencies or want to do, I thought that made a kind of a nice acronym, CMAPper. When this information was first given to me, when I first began to develop the presentation, map and collect were inverted or swapped in position. So I didn't think that MCAPper sounded as good as CMAPper does, and it kind of relates to the ideal functionality of the program, which is its mapping function. And SAPFIM can also be used and is a wonderful tool for encouraging and facilitating the public participation in identifying and addressing safety and accessibility issues in the community. Okay, now this technology tool, as I just mentioned, is very useful in reporting the inventory elements that are required by the ADA, and it's also helpful to make data-driven decisions when prioritizing and analyzing the condition of the pedestrian environment. Now, the most exciting feature of SAPFIM, I think most will find, is that it's available free of charge to any state, local public agency or metropolitan planning organization. Now, it's free of charge if an agency has its own web server infrastructure so that it can host the program and the database for the collection of the data that's being collected throughout their system. And if an agency does not have that web server infrastructure, then they are welcome to contract with Florida International University, or FIU, for a nominal annual fee, and they'll be happy to host that information for them. Okay, so who developed SATFIM? Well, it was a brainchild of my predecessor, the DOT's first and only ADA coordinator until his retirement, Dean Perkins. Dean was recognized upon his retirement in March of 2019 as the country's longest continually serving state transportation agency ADA coordinator. That's a long designation, but suffice it to say that Dean was appointed the ADA coordinator for the Florida DOT when the law passed in 1990, and then he continually served in that position and in that role until he retired in March of last year. And unfortunately, though, his entire DOT family was saddened when he passed away in March of this year. So we hope to continue the legacy and efforts that he began with the DOT to improve safety and accessibility for the people of the state of Florida. But the brainchild of Dean was latched onto by FHWA Florida Division, who provided a STIC incentive grant, and then in cooperation with FIU, Broward MPO, and other LPAs around the country, the SAPFIM team came together to develop the program. Now, the picture on the screen from left to right, left in the orange safety vest is Dean Perkins, and then next to him is Dr. Fabian Ceballos, who is the transit director of FIU, and then next to him is my friend and mentor, Kerry Shepard, with the FHWA Florida Division. Next to him is Gabe Matthews in DOT's transit office, and then next to her is Peter Skies, I believe his name is, with the Broward MPO. So why was SAPFIM developed? Well, as Kerry and Dean traveled around the state, one of the greatest complaints that were expressed to them by our local partners and industry partners was that developing a system-wide plan for transitioning non-compliant elements was a heavy lift. It was a huge, ominous task, and a lot of these partners didn't even know where to begin. So in taking that to heart, Dean and Kerry and the others on the SAPFIM development team came together, recognizing that vulnerable road users are an emphasis area, and of course we want to prioritize safety and accessibility. In addition to that, as funding is increasingly uncertain, especially in today's pandemic environment, the team wanted to make the best use of transportation dollars by providing a cost-effective and tech-savvy tool that could be used by any size agency, actually medium to smaller size agencies, that would enable them to be able to collect this data, analyze it, and then program how to proceed with their transition plan. And of course, this effort supports safety and equity goals of the transportation agency. So how does it work? As the diagram on the screen shows, users interface with the SAPFIM software or program using any internet-enabled electronic device, ranging from a desktop computer in the office or to any handheld internet-enabled device that can be used in the field. in using any commonly used web browser, they can connect to the web server, which hosts the database where the attributes and location information are stored. How does it work? I just mentioned that it's usable by any internet-enabled mobile handheld device. The data collection is actually one of the greatest features of the program in that it's very simple to use by providing data entry screens that are intuitive and that contain drop-down menus to help facilitate that data collection. And the intent was to make it simple and easy to use so that it could be used by more than just internal staff to the transportation agency, but actually it could dabble in the idea of crowdsourcing, and you could even have interested parties, civic groups or community service volunteers, or even high school football teams or other high school clubs could actually be trained on how to collect this data using their own smartphones or iPads, and they could help and assist the public works staff in collecting this data. Now, I think the greatest feature of the program is the mapping. It is a GIS-based program, and the data is automatically integrated with Google Maps. Therefore, it's very intuitive and easy to use, as prolific as the use of Google Maps is. And it stores field measurements for the attributes of the pedestrian facility features, as well as pictures, and they're all stored in the database within SAPSIM. Now on your screen now is a screenshot I've taken from one of the data input screens. You can see in the aerial view of the picture, this is West Flagler Street in Miami, Florida, and this is right at the entrance to FIU's engineering school. You can see that the highlight box has surrounded the location balloon, which is located on the sidewalk. It's on the sidewalk parallel to the east-west arterial, West Flagler Street. And then if we blow that entry field up, you can see that the radio button for sidewalk is selected. And then there's an input field for sidewalk width in feet, cross slope in a percentage, vertical change, or joints or cracks in inches. There's a pull-down menu to describe the obstructions that may exist in the sidewalk. There's a yes-no radio button to indicate the presence of lighting. There's another input field for tripping hazards or changes in level in inches. And then there are two pull-down menus, one for the material of the sidewalk and one for its condition. And then finally, there's a large input field to enable a user to provide comments and other observations. The next input field is for the curb ramp itself. You can see that the location balloon has moved from now the sidewalk to the curb ramp location in the northeast quadrant of the intersection with West Flagler and the driveway into FIU's engineering school. When we blow up the input portion of the screen, the radio button for ramp has been selected. There is an input field for slope and cross slope, both in percentages, the width of the ramp in feet, the top landing dimensions in inches, the bottom counter slope at the interface of the ramp and the roadway is available there in percentage. The detectable warning dimensions there can be entered in inches, and the type of ramp being collected there is available by pull-down menu. And then there's a radio button for yes or no to indicate the presence of the pavement markings identifying the marked crossings at the ramp. And then other observations and notes can be added in that field. And then the third input screen highlights the location balloon in the center of the crosswalk crossing the driveway into the engineering school, and the crossing is parallel to the east-west arterial West Flagler Street. We blow up that input screen. The crossing is selected at the top radio button. Pavement marking presence is indicated with a yes or no radio button. There's a field for horizontal opening, the joints and grates in inches. The style of crossing can be described with a pull-down descriptor. The presence of an island or a median adjacent to the crossing or through which the crossing goes can be indicated with radio buttons, yes or no. And then there are three pull-down menus, one for pedestrian signal, the material of the crossing, and the condition of the crossing. Again, observations and other notes can be added as well. So, as is the case with most research projects, the authors of the project also indicated at its conclusion that they had already identified areas that could be improved for future enhancements, which includes search functions, better queries, improved mapping capabilities, as well as improved compliance reports. So if anybody's interested in possibly using SAPSIM for their own transportation agency, I would urge you to reach out and contact Dr. Fabian Ceballos, and his email address is fabiallos@siu.edu, and he'll be happy to get the information to you so you can begin by installing that program on your own web servers, or he'd be happy to discuss with you possibly hosting your data for you. Now, the next topic to share with you and how FDOT is leveraging technology is how we plan to use it internally to our department. And I've shown the picture of facial recognition on the screen associated with artificial intelligence and machine learning, but our use in the department of artificial intelligence is not nearly as ominous as the concept of facial recognition might seem. But rather, we're going to use it to capture roadside facilities, much like AI and ML is already being used to capture traffic data within a roadway system. Currently, DOT has captured the inventory of our pedestrian facilities within the state highway system right-of-way using a video log. The image on the screen is showing the video log pictures that were captured at a major intersection in Tallahassee, Florida. This is an intersection of a major east-west arterial, locally known as Tennessee Street, or it's a US 90. And then the north-south arterial is locally known as North Monroe Street or Thomasville Road, but it's US 27 and US 319. Control buttons at the bottom of the screen indicate that you can frame backwards or frame forwards, or you can play the images backward and forward at different play speeds, ranging incrementally from 1 frame per second up to 4 frames per second. And then, of course, there's a stop button so that you can stop and review a particular image in more detail. At the top of the screen, there are fields identifying the roadway ID, where in Florida we use an 8-digit roadway ID, the direction of the view, in this case it's looking north, and then the mile point. And then below that is the roadway name, the frame date, in this case was November of 2015, and then the frame number. So that all of that information, or any information that's gleaned from these images, can be tied directly to a particular frame image, so that any further review can be accomplished at the same location. Now, DOT wanted to find out how we could utilize technology to help make this process a whole lot more efficient, because currently we do the analysis and review of these video logs manually. I did it for 2 of our 7 districts, or 7 geographic districts. I did it for 2 of them last year, and it took several weeks, probably, I don't know, maybe, if I had to guess or put a number with it, I'd say maybe 100 hours, man hours for each district. plus or minus. And we've got 7 districts, and before I became ADA coordinator, the ADA coordinators in each of our districts would do this. So we've got 7 districts multiplied by hundreds of hours per district. It's a huge undertaking. The DOT wanted to investigate and look into the ability to automatically data mine this information from these images and perform our transition plan validation process using software and technology. The image on the screen is showing one of the frame captures within our video log, and then the highlighted rectangle is indicating the region of interest, which in this case is highlighting the pedestrian push button that's mounted on the pole. The next image is showing the detectable warning area that we're interested in validating, capturing that data so we can validate its presence and compliance. This image shows the same intersection, but now we're capturing the sloped area for the curb ramp. And then finally, we're looking at the walkable area for the pedestrians, which is the approach sidewalk. So DOT's Transportation Data Analytics Office, in partnership with our consulting firm HNTB, conducted a pilot study to investigate the state-of-the-art data collection using a vehicle that has the capacity to collect LiDAR information, video log information, as well as pavement data all at one time. Whereas in the past, these activities occurred, these were isolated activities occurring individually. We could capture this data basically at highway speeds and capture all 3 of them at once. And not only is the data captured, but then the pilot process, the pilot project also looked into using technology, specifically machine learning and artificial intelligence features or technology, to try to data mine the specific information from the sensory data. The table, the bar graph on the screen, shows the images, the features that the pilot project investigated data mining for to extract from the sensory information. You notice on the left 1/3 of the bar graph that the pilot project extracted 7 sidewalks, which was feature 217 in the DOT's RCI, or Roadway Characteristics Inventory. On the right 1/3 of the bar graph, you can see that 421 ADA ramps were captured over the 31-mile corridor, and 183 crosswalks, which is feature 453, were captured. And the following table shows the time that it took for the software to extract that data. Looking at the bottom 2 rows, the discrete point locations of ADA ramps, it took 480 minutes or 8 hours to extract 421 ADA ramps, which is an average of 1 ramp per minute. The 183 crosswalks took 360 minutes or 6 hours to extract, which is roughly 2 minutes per feature. And then if you look up to feature 217 sidewalks, it took 240 minutes in order to capture 7 sidewalks, which sidewalk is a linear element, and so it would take a human analyst longer to fully capture the data along the full length of the sidewalk. So you would expect that it would take the computer a little longer than capturing the discrete point elements like an ADA ramp or a crosswalk. So it captured sidewalks at an average of 34 minutes per sidewalk. Now the pilot project findings reported back that they investigated the current state of the art using AI and ML. They developed prototypes using the existing training models that were available from the public domain, and then they used their own, or they developed rather their own prototypes using images that were captured from within the pilot. So phase one of the process is image classification, where they train the software to recognize an object in an image, in this case, the image of a dog. The next step is object detection, where the software is trained to detect multiple objects within their bounding boxes within an image. In this case, there's two dogs of different breeds and a cat. The next phase is semantic segmentation, where each pixel of an image is associated with a categorical label. In this case, two dogs and a cat. Whereas the instant segmentation, or the final phase, takes each pixel of an image and associates it with an instant label. So instead of just saying two dogs and a cat, you have the instance of dog 1, you have dog 2, you have cat 1. So that's just a simple overview of the process used to train the software and develop the model. This image was captured, or these two images were captured in the pilot process. The first image on the left is an aerial view of a intersection where it's showing the data point LiDAR data point cloud. If you look closely, if you can zoom in on your computer and look closely, the green shading is actually the data points that were collected by the LiDAR, where LiDAR is light detection and ranging. So the data point cloud is so dense that it actually looks to actually shade the image into almost a green tint. The image on the right is a street level view of the same location, the same corner. And again, if you could zoom in closely on that, you would see that the data point cloud is so dense that it's shading that image. This is an image captured in the pilot project where the software has successfully identified and labeled an ADA ramp, the PED push button that is mounted on the mast arm pole, the horizontal street sign that's mounted on the arm of the mast arm, as well as the pedestrian lighting feature, the light pole. This image shows the computer machine language that the software goes through as it's running the model to actually inference thousands of images in a very short amount of time. And then the software assigns a confidence score for each of the features that it has identified. And that is shown in each of these two images on your screen. The image on the left is the image of an intersection with a business that abuts closely with the corner of the intersection. And you can see that the ADA ramp has been identified with an 89.8% confidence score. The image on the right is also an intersection where a business is located, but it's a little further back from the crosswalk area. The street sign has been identified with a 97.3 confidence level. A light pole mounted on top of the mast arm has been identified with a 93.6% confidence score. And finally, the ADA ramp is shown there with a 92.9% confidence score. So, with that said, these are two instances of the way FDOT is leveraging technology to make the transition plan to not be quite such a heavy lift, but hopefully to progress the process so that we can be in compliance with the requirements of the ADA, not just because it's federal law, but as my colleague in New Hampshire said, because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Brad. That was fascinating. And before I go any further, I want to extend my sincerest condolences on the passing of Dean Perkins. I feel as though I met him, but even if I didn't meet him, I know of his legacy in Florida. So I just want to extend my condolences.
Thank you, Tina.
So you're welcome. So I'd like to ask the panel this question. What do you suggest to do? What was your biggest bang for the buck? And this is for you as well as Seth. What would you suggest to the audience? as your biggest bang for your buck. Because funds are everything this day and age.
Funds are definitely everything, and one thing that Dean Perkins was a spearhead for and successful in doing was making ADA completely integrated with the way FDOT conducts business. In other words, it's not a separate pot of money that we use whenever we encounter non-compliant elements, but rather ADA compliancy is completely rolled in to our design, construction, maintenance, and operations process, so that it's not just a separate pot of money, but it's just part of our entire work program. So if you're able to fully integrate the ADA into the way you do business, then it doesn't necessarily seem like it's that big of a funding issue. It's just taken care of as the process of project delivery.
Yeah, we in New Hampshire kind of have the same philosophy. You know, a lot of our ADA efforts are to upgrade our curb ramps, and it's just built in naturally to all of our resurfacing projects. So kind of like Brad said, we don't have to think about it. It's just part of the way we do business. Includes accessibility.
That is really helpful. I think that's helpful for the audience to hear that. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I know the audience is interested in your contact information. I think Brad Allen was going to address that. But before I turn that over to him, I want to extend my sincerest appreciation to each of the presenters. I want to mention them specifically, Mr. Harry Kala, the Associate Administrator for Infrastructure. I want to thank you, Sant Michener, fascinating presentation, and also you, Brad Bradley, for your presentation as well. What I really like about today's session is there's something for everyone. We have a smaller state, New Hampshire DOT, and then we have presentation from Florida DOT, which is a larger state. So there's something here that everyone can glean information. So as I mentioned previously, and thank you for that slide, Brad Allen, if you have any questions, we encourage you to contact the presenters directly. You should be able to see their contact information there, and we'll leave it up for a few minutes. But I thank you everyone for your participation. Without further ado, I'm going to say once again thank you, and you're complete for the day. I just want to mention one more thing. Please ensure that you participate in the next part of our 5-part series. It will be part 3. It's scheduled for September 30th. And this is incorporating the transition plan into the SIP process. Once again, we're going to have valuable information and tools and methods that everyone can benefit from. So thank you once again for your time and attention.